Okay, so you'll want to make sure your shade is completely dry. Go ahead and smack it on the table. Get the water out of the brim. Got my cell phone out because I'm going to use it as a timer. Which is a good idea. We do have a pocket watch laying, or a little watch in shop somewhere if you don't want to use a cell phone. I just put the stopwatch on my cell phone on so I can see how long I've been doing it. As you do this more and more, when you have a line, knowing about how long it's taking you helps when it comes to when and to stop and start. Alright, so that looks completely dry. What you're gonna do is, what you need for this is Palmolive soap. You can't substitute any other form of soap. It has to be Palmolive. There's some ingredient on it that other soaps don't have, so it has to be that one. And then I use a makeup sponge, which is one of the dense white foam wedges. Other people have used a paintbrush. Right now, this is a process that reacts. It's harder to do when it's warm, and it's relatively warm in here, so the paintbrush is a little bit harder to use, so I stick with the wedge. If it's colder in the building, this process will be a little quicker. Unfortunately, it's warm today, so it'll take a little bit longer. So what you want to do is dip the wedge in the soap. You just want a little bit of coating. You don't want it to be too much. If it's globby, put it on the side. So I take it and I'll rotate it on the shade. Make sure you get deep in the brim and then kind of come up around the edges. The goal of this is to get things as thin and even as possible. I usually go around the brim. So you want to avoid overlaps, bubbles, that kind of thing. Since it's hot in here, I'm going to do one more layer. And again, try to keep the soap as thin as possible and avoid any bubbles or big soap globs. So now next thing we're going to do is rub it. So take your hand and rub it like this. The goal is to keep the soap moving as much as possible so airflow gets to it and one spot doesn't get darker than the other, that kind of things. You will see some spots come through, usually as the shade darkens. Sometimes you can buff those out. Sometimes they hit too extreme, the shade is unusable. I like to lay mine on the table and spin them like this. You can also pick it up and rub them like this. Either way is fine. I just like putting them on the table because I can see exactly what's happening. But you can alternate if your arm gets tired or anything like that. Usually I would set a timer, which I forgot to, but we'll just keep trying to do this. When the soap dries out a little, you'll want to add a little bit more. One thing that's important to remember is the finished shade is a lot darker after we spray it than it is like this, so you don't want to go too dark. Usually if you go a little too dark, it'll start getting blotchier, that kind of thing. And you can alternate. Sometimes I'll pick it up and rub it like this. And again, like right now the soap's fine, but if you find that it's getting really gummy, you can add another thin layer of soap. We might have got a tiny bit too much on here, but I think it'll still work. And again, I don't know how long we've been doing this because I forgot to set my timer, but usually if it was cold in here, this would take about 3 minutes. I'm saying today this will take about 5 or 6 because of the temperature in the air. Let's rub it a little bit more. I think it's just about ready. And as you can see, some of the blotches, I know it's hard to see with the soap coverage, but it looks like a lot of our blotches have evened out. Alright, and that looks pretty good. Now we'll go ahead and wash it off. You want to make sure you keep the soap moving. Okay, so I never use any kind of sponge or anything like that. I usually just wipe this off. I'll take the steel wool, and if there are any big patches in the inside, wipe those off. Let's see. Alright, so you want to make sure all of the residue is gone from the soap. This looks pretty good. I should have brought my towel in with me, but I forgot it, but that's okay. This is ready to dry. Okay. Go ahead and wipe it in a towel. You want to make sure your gloves are dry as well. Go ahead and smack it to get all the water out of the brim. Try not to rub this too hard because you can take the finish off. So on this, I would usually set it aside and let it completely dry and, you know, do another one while this is drying, but for training purposes, we'll just go ahead and try this real good and then spray it. So I think that's pretty good. You're gonna see a little bit of inconsistencies in the finish, but that's okay. I mean, it is hand done, so you're never gonna get it completely perfect. So you want to make sure, don't want to keep the can just on one straight burst. You want to kind of rock it back and forth and get a nice coat on there. Never want it to run. So that's about it. It darkens when it dries. You will see subtle lines and things like that in this, and that's okay. Try your best to make it as even as possible, but I've found that, you know, you'll get 1 out of every 5 that's super perfect. Other than that, it just needs to be passable. And that's about it.